How did all this start for you?
Yeah, so probably the easiest way to say it, guys, when I was 10 years old, I walked out in the living room and said, I want to be a writer. And before that, I had said, astronaut and whatever. But this was the first one I felt. And my parents were laudably very supportive of that. They also said, okay, that's great. Now it's time to brush your teeth and go to bed. And so I really promptly forgot that for most of my life. And it wasn't until I had a big wake-up call around age 34 that I realized that I had buried some dreams of mine um, underneath this pursuit of money or whatever I called success back then. And as I began to unwind and go through that process of reconnecting, I also bumped into trauma, my own. And I didn't even know it at the time. I was like probably many people in your work. Um, I felt that trauma was for other people. It was affecting
Hmm.
other people. And through the process of a lot of self-discovery and healing, I began to notice that trauma bent my self-perception, the way I saw the world, what I thought was possible. And then as I was working with so many other people, I would find that they had creative dreams or desires, such as to write a book, and we would end up going through it and start working on blocks or whatever, and they would end up also bumping into trauma. So that's what really turned me on to realize there's a direct connection between what we call creativity, and I don't love to see that siloed in the arts. I think that
Hmm.
creativity wants to flow through all of life. But so many people, the most common phrase was, I'm just not that creative. And the longer I go with this study and this work, the more that hurts me to hear that, because genuinely we are creative. We've been molded into believing that we're not.
What was that wake up call for you? You said ran into that wake up call and then subsequently bumped into trauma.
Yeah, so I was in hot pursuit of a big financial services goal, had just built a big office. Everyone thought I was so successful, but guy, I was waking up at 3 a.m. every day, just completely stressed out and afraid. I knew I was off track somewhere. I didn't know where it was. Because the external markers and reflections were, you're doing great, you're very
Hmm.
successful. And so a young guy walked into my office one day and asked me to, he worked for me and asked me to go to a meditation retreat, which sounded good, sounded chill. I said yes, and then I found myself feeling afraid of it, and I wasn't sure why. It turned out to be a shamanic initiation, and they were administering DMT, which I had never had any kind of medicine or drug experiences in my
Oh my
life. So
God.
this was really intense. Yeah, so that was I could talk a lot longer there, but that was this huge wake up call. It was like a near death experience. I got clarity on, oh my God, here's the life I've been living and what I thought was important, and here's how much misalignment there is between what I've
Mm.
been doing and who I really am and what I care about.
That's really interesting. You were, by all outward appearances, very successful, but yet there was this. I think what kind of intrigued me is there was this angst that you didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
Something was calling to you.
Hmm.
And what did you see in this experience, or what did you experience that was the wake up call for you in that shamanic journey?
Yeah, I didn't even know what a shaman was at the time. It all seemed very weird. Yeah, it was a moment of clarity, like they talk about in recovery movements. It was this flash perspective on, wow, this is the life that I've been more or less unconsciously creating, but I'd been taking on the values and the goals of my society rather than asking myself, who am I? What does success actually mean to me?
Mm-hmm.
And when I noticed that gap, Guy, between this is what I've been up to and what I really always longed to do in my life, I didn't know what to do about it then. All I knew was I feel, and this is common language. I just feel stuck. I just feel so stuck. And I hear that from a lot of people now too. And over the years since then refining, what does stuck mean? And what it meant was there were a lot of limiting beliefs. There were a lot of reasons why I didn't feel like I could bring my life into alignment with who I really am and what I cared about. Turned out many of those had roots in childhood trauma, the way I saw myself in the world.
Limiting beliefs such as what? Because I think a lot of us can recognize or identify with that. I certainly can.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of us, it's a rare person who doesn't have a lot of those going on. In my case, I'm not good enough. I'm not enough. I'm not safe. I don't belong. That's really that belief of I don't belong led me to eventually write Blessed Are the Weird. And it was from that sense of I don't even know if I belong here in this world. Like, is there a place for me here?
Mm,
um and as an INFJ, Enneagram 4, whatever else you want to layer on there, no, I definitely had this sense of I'm an outsider. Was I born in the wrong time and place for who I am? And that quest then began to take me back again to really have a perspective on, no, there's a way to belong in your life and in this world. But you have to learn how to become more true to that and then find
mm.
out what doors have been shut because of old experiences,
So what did you do? How did this start to unfold for you?
Hmm. The first big thing was that the financial crisis of 08, 09 came along and just completely wiped me out. And what a gift that was, Guy. I mean, of course, at the time it was terrible, but it was a gift because it gave me this chance to kind of clear the slate, be tabula rasa. I moved to Austin with my then wife and three little kids, and we didn't know anybody. It just felt like the right thing to do. And that's where I went through some years of really deep self-discovery and really began to look under the hood for the first time, I would say, in my whole life, and at that to that degree.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And what did this, I mean, obviously you started writing this book. How did you get to this point where you were like, okay, I want to start? I mean, not only were you working on this for yourself, but
Mm.
started working with other people. So did you go back to school? What did you start to do that started to concretize
Mm.
this heart opening in a sense for you?
Yeah, well, it was such a amazing experience. I had to get 3 part-time jobs because I could not go back into sales or management or anything. I was looking for landscape work, whatever I could get, because I genuinely had lost connection with my identity as the person I had been before, and even some of what felt like my skills and tools, Guy. And so I had a part-time job working for the government office. I was a contractor just carrying boxes back between the warehouse and their main office, and I had a lot of time on my hands in that warehouse, and I remember taking a copy of Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way with me. My father had given it to me before I left town, so I think you might need this. I took it to the warehouse one day and opened it up and started reading, and I immediately had tears running down my face. It just felt like, oh my God, this is exactly what I need. So I began using Julia's prescriptions, journaling every day. And in that warehouse, I learned how to meditate. And I also began to read deeply into psychology and philosophy and really a lot of self-discovery because I'm like, I know for sure if I jump up and try to go start something else in my life, even like going back to school, I wasn't even sure where to start.
Hmm.
Felt so disillusioned by what I had been up to and where it had led me that I really knew that I had to take my time. And so I didn't start working with people at all right away. It was several years later. There was several years of really deep, like just staying with it without any kind of even knowing where it might lead.
That takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of balls and it takes a lot of courage to do that. Because as you talk about in this book, our society does not encourage that. In fact, it encourages us to do the opposite.
Yeah.
Along this path, did you have people that you were connecting with who were supporting you in this? Where did you get that strength to keep moving forward and self trust?
Yeah. Man, I wish I could say that I had a plan. I didn't. People did. I love that you ask who showed up to support because so many people began coming into my life one at a time, sometimes very unlikely messengers of mental health and sanity would come along. A guy in a cigar shop in Austin turned out to be a CBT expert and sat down and taught me some
Oh my God.
self-discovery techniques. And oh my God, that was a lifeline. And a couple years later, I entered this writing contest. I had started to write, and I entered this contest that there was a book deal being offered, and it was offered by this publisher, Hay House, not Hay House, Hampton Roads. And so I didn't win the contest, but I ended up connecting with the main publisher, and a couple of years later, he hired me as a marketing director to help with publishing and with putting on events. We got to work with people like Don Miguel Ruiz, who wrote the Four Agreements, and Byron Katie, and Dr. Joe Dispenza. So I got to work with hands-on putting these events together and learning the material and going through it. And I just look at that as a tremendous stroke of grace for me, because each one of those experiences helped me begin to reform a sense of this is who I can be in this world. Not defined by a job or even a career, but I get to define myself and then find out that there is a place for me here, you know?
Hmm. That's really powerful. I mean, as I was reading this book, I I mean, this is crazy because a lot of the things you're saying are very similar to my experience. I
Mm.
mean, I spent a lot of years crushing down, holding down my creativity because I needed to get a degree or I needed to be successful in a job, um, and I think a lot of us can agree with that. And one of the things you say in your book here is that we're all creative in different ways, of course. Um, when people say that to you, what are you joking? I'm not a writer. I'm not an artist. I'm not creative. What do you say to them?
Well, the publisher didn't include the first sentence I wrote, but the first sentence was, "We need to rescue creativity from the arts," and that was meant to go. And I hasten to say, it's not that artists don't get to have it, but the perception that creativity is this bailiwick of those we see on stage or we read their books or whatever. To me, that's actual blasphemy to the human spirit, because as I see it, creativity is like sap in a tree or blood in our veins. It's meant to flow through every part of our lives. And so as I work with people, Guy, with that perspective, it's like, how can we bring artfulness to X part of your life? So a lot of times we'll
Hmm.
do a review or a assessment and just say, what are the hot spots? What are the places that hurt in your life? And as we begin to sit with that, I'll ask, how could we bring artfulness to this relationship, to this circumstance? And as I watch people begin to apply their intrinsic creativity, their intrinsic genius to solving, not just solving the problems, but actually bringing fresh life, fresh perspective, fresh art to an experience. I watch them come alive, and inevitably, if they are involved in something we call the arts, um they find that process of letting it flow through other parts of their life, it also informs and infuses what they're working on, you know.
Just remind everyone, speaking with Jacob Nordby, we're talking about his book, The Creative Cure. The book here, the title, The Creative Cure, the implication is that something is off, something is misaligned, obviously, cure. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, it was interesting as I was workshopping that title with the publisher. We were sitting with it and going, how can we say something that we feel is true, but is not making some wild promise, like your creativity will make you rich and famous and get fast cars or whatever. Um, I this was during the time, Guy, that I really began to make the deep connection between trauma, and whether that's capital T trauma, like would show up on the ACEs, or whether it's just sort of more subtle trauma that we are dealing with just being alive at this time on earth. You know all about trauma, so I'm not telling you anything new, but I've loved this definition. The simplest definition of trauma is that the event has the quality of feeling inescapable.
Mm.
And when you put it that way, when you think about the pace of change and acceleration of growth in our world, or change that destabilizes us, or you take the sense of helplessness in the face of something like COVID, what I find is a lot of people don't realize how much of the time they're spending up in the fight or flight zone in their lives. I experience this as well. So I feel like I've lost connection to the question you asked me, though.
Well, it was around that. I'm just curious about the title, The Creative Cure.
Mm,
What is the implication? What do you, I mean, I feel like, I mean, it really resonated with me. I feel like we need to save our creativity. We need
yeah,
to save our souls, really.
yeah, yeah, right. Yeah. Well, okay, so I'm glad you, thanks for helping me refine that. Yeah, I feel so strongly, Guy, that before the Industrial Revolution happened, before we had distribution systems from art and music and things like this, people were doing this. They were sitting and telling stories to each other. They're making music with each other. They weren't putting that kind of activity under the pressure of it has to become a commercial success. And it was life-giving. And whether it
Mhm.
was making beautiful food or a beautiful garden or singing a song or whatever it might be, these activities are life-giving. And I find that in our culture right now, we get ourselves so isolated from the heartbeat of life itself that, to me, I encourage people to please unhook their creative desires and ambitions from an economic outcome. Not that it can't turn into an economically satisfying thing, but with that pressure, it means that we probably won't do it. Like, I want to learn the
Mhm.
guitar, it's on my list. I'm very busy right now, and so sometimes it's hard to take the time. But I know that when I go sit down and play on the guitar badly, I'm giving something back to myself. I'm actually sending a signal to my psyche that says, I matter. The things that I love to do matter. And sometimes just
Mm.
5 minutes a day of doing something like that can actually help me feel more alive in the rest of my life, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I often find out, or when I go back to my drawing, my
Mm,
collage making, I feel a lot of pressure. What am I doing? That I'm wasting my time.
yeah,
This isn't any good. That circle, that cycle of
yeah,
negativity,
yeah.
it's uh it's harmful, you know. How do we get away from that?
I just think that part of it is the conversations like this, bringing more illumination to it, because you and I can use a lot of clinical and professional words, and they're true. But if we step down below that and go, what would make me feel like I am coming more alive today?
Mm.
What how I find that every time that I engage, I journal every day. I have a practice. I'd love to give your listeners a free download of a journaling process that I use if you want. But I love to share very, very simple 5-minute practices that people in the middle of our busy, hurried modern life can actually employ. And I say, don't believe me. Don't believe because it's in a book somewhere. I want you to experience this. And if you feel like your life meter has extended back into the green a little bit, then do a little bit more of that,
Hmm.
because you'll find that that actually does help you in the rest of your life make better decisions, feel more centered, and actually come back into a sense of feeling like my life matters.
So, why did you write the book, and who's it for?
Mm, oh my God. I mean, I was in the middle of starting to write it because my publisher had read Blessed Are the Weird. I did that as an indie book. And he said, I really want you to write a book that feels like it's for more people, not just those who might self identify as being weird. And he's like, I can see a lot of wistfulness in the world of people saying, I want to be in some way part of the creativity. I don't think I'm creative. And I was walking through my brother's office. We started this company, this tech company years ago, and he had developed this entire team of developers, and he was asking me about writing this book, and I was just in the first draft, and he looked at me and he said, Jake, I just don't feel like I'm that creative. And he had this wistfulness, and then he walked into his office, Guy, and sat down in front of 3 screens, and it looked like the Matrix, all this code. And I watched his posture change when he sat down in front of those screens. He forgot I was there. He was going into a flow state.
Well,
And I waited for a minute. I put my hand on his shoulder and I said, Nate, I'm watching an artist at work right now. You just said you're not very creative, but you are in your art right now. And he looked at me and
well,
he's like, I've never thought of it that way. And that experience really informed the next several drafts of that book, because I'm like, this is not a book necessarily for those who already say, yes, I'm creative, I'm artistic. It might help them too, but I really want to reach the people who say, I'm just not one of those people. And I want them to
mhm.
know you are one. And by becoming one, by claiming that, you can bring more richness and value and sense of purpose into your life.
How in the book you talk about trauma, you talk about that um, impacting creativity and getting in the way. Talk more about that and how you wanted to bring that to the attention of the reader.
Mm. Well, Guy, I've probably always been one of these weird guys, and maybe you too. Like I was always just a half beat off the rest, and so I didn't always fit in. Yeah.
Well, in the inscription to that book, "Blessed are the weird," you wrote, "Guy, I think you're one of us," and I was like, "Oh boy, this guy got me."
I felt it was a small risk, but I'm glad it didn't land poorly. Yeah. Um, I really just began to notice how many of the activities that a lot of myself and so many people around me and people I was working with felt limited, felt unavailable to them or us. And as we would sit with that, for example, I was part of a men's group and we'd get together and drum together as part of the, beginning part of the circle. And that was a very comfortable, safe place. And it was admittedly weird. And so guys were going there going, yeah, I'm going to do some weird stuff, but it feels good. But I began to notice what the medicine was in being able to actually get them over the line into something that was creative. And then in this men's group, there was an atmosphere of safety and very well led by a professional who knew how to help us begin examining traumas and delving into it. And when I watched myself, but also the other men in this group and then other people I was working with in my workshops, when I watched them stand up straighter and become more limber in their lives, feel more fluid, more resourceful and capable, I began to realize there is a tremendously powerful connection between buried traumatic experiences and our inability to feel like that we are enough in our life, that we're enough for the world that we live in, for the circumstances we might find ourselves in. And so I began to really go deeply into that topic. The body keeps a score was a big one for me. The deepest well was huge. And then just spending a lot of time with therapists and people who are working with me and other people, it began to help me see, yeah, we have created concepts called creativity and concept called
Mhm.
healing, and that we tend to keep them far apart. I'm grateful that academic research is coming out now that shows such a powerful connection between some version of engaging with the arts even, or nature, and trauma healing.
This was, I think, the first book. I was surprised to read about trauma in your book. I was like,
Mm,
wow, this is going in a really interesting, necessary route. And
interesting.
again, it was really speaking to me and
Mm,
my life and how I've managed to cover up uh, my creativity and feel that you know it's almost an indulgence. You
yeah.
know, it
Yes.
felt like I can't spend time on that. I got to work. But you're talking about
Mm,
creativity in and of itself, this life force, this necessary part of us
mhm.
that so many of us don't honor.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's like if not now, when, you know?
That's it. I mean, I couldn't agree more, Guy. I love that as a therapist, as somebody who's so involved. I love your vulnerability right now. I think it's easy to stand behind a professional title and go, "Yeah, I'm good." But I think the fact is, and every one of us is affected by it to some degree or another. And the World Economic Forum came out in 2014 with their 2015 report for what was going to be necessary, or 2020, what was going to be necessary for career survival. And creativity moved up from the bottom of the list of 10 to number 3,
Well,
and empathy and some other what we call softer skills that actually showed up on the list for the first time. And I'm like, wait a minute, there's something really important here. um, and so I went and did a survey with 10,000 people and said, what's your greatest struggle with creativity? 74.3% of them said, I doubt my talents and abilities. I don't believe I'm good enough.
mm.
Now, if you go ask a 3-year-old if they're just drew a picture, are you good enough to draw? Are you an artist? They're like, hell yes, I'm an artist. So at some point along the process of enculturation and socialization, education, we start to lose that belief that we have something inside that matters. We start to feel like we have to stand in line and be conformist. And it's creativity is for those bright, shiny people up on the stage, those strange ones, those gifted ones, whatever. And my message is, folks, if we can reconnect with that in ourselves, we can actually begin to feel like our lives matter here. And that to
Mm.
me becomes a cure for the ills of, a lot of people feel so overwhelmed by this world and the suffering in it. And I can identify with that. Um, and I just know that if one person at a time, if we can begin to reconnect and practice our innate nature, our creativity and our joy, that's the medicine the world needs.
Mm. So I mean, there's so many things I want to talk about here. Talk a little bit about how you structured the book. What were your goals in writing the book?
My publisher would laugh, you asking about my structure, because he really did a tremendous job of structure. That's not one of my gifts, I would say. But he helped me actually structure it in a way to say, I want to bring a level of practicality and experiential practice to people in ways that feel easy. If you say, listen, you need to sit down and paint a painting, that'll be super therapeutic for you. A lot of people will nod their heads and say yes, but they'll never do it. Whereas if I can say, here's something you can do in 3 minutes per day and see how it makes you feel. So that became my real goal, was very micro practices, micro choices,
Hmm.
Yeah.
When did you get to the point, Jacob, kind of going back to your story, um, which is really fascinating to me? When did you get to the point after you uh, kind of let go of your job, you started in that warehouse? That for some reason I'm drawn to that warehouse. A lot of things seem to happen in that warehouse. When did
Truly.
you? Was there a point? I'm not. I know there's not one point, but talk about
Hmm.
the progression, the evolution of when you started to feel okay. I'm kind of getting back. I'm honoring myself. This feels right or good. Or
Mm,
was
mm.
there ever a time like that, an experience like that?
Wow, that's such a great question, Guy, because there was cognitive dissonance for a bunch of those years in there. On one hand, it was like, no, I know this feels good to stay with writing, even though it's not economically rewarding right now or whatever, but it feels good. It feels like I'm engaging in some version of one of my life purposes there. But on the other hand, there were probably 8 years during which I really felt confused and wondered if it would ever begin to get its feet on the ground in a way that would feel as if, hey, I can turn this into work that will be rewarding, not just rewarding psychologically or emotionally, but also financially. And so I'm really glad you asked the question, because that's one thing I sit with a lot of people on and ask them to gauge their willingness to be patient with the process. Because the process of self-discovery and then self-acceptance that can open that space of transformation that allows for all this to happen, sometimes that can be very confusing, and it can feel like it's not going anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Um, much like therapy can for a lot of people. It's like, are we getting anywhere here? It's like, well, a little bit by little bit, there's this accrual factor. And so I would love to say, yes, there was this moment when I was like, I got crowned. I am now on my path, but it was an accrual thing, Guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that it has taken me time, because I'm with a lot of people who don't feel as if um they'll come to clarity very quickly, and I'm glad to be able to tell them, you don't have to, as long as you're willing to stay with the job of it. It will develop over time.
So, who's the book for?
Oh, I'd say it's really for anyone, Guy, who wakes up and goes, some version of, I want to become alive again inside of my life. That
So, probably pretty much everybody.
that feels broad. But and I don't feel like an evangelist out there trying to pull people into an idea. I've found that there are so many people who already are hungry. I don't have to go out and proselytize. If I just put it out there and invite people into an experience, just it's like feeding a squirrel in the park. It's one
Mhm.
peanut and then back off and another one. If I can make people feel safe enough to trust their own intuition, their inner senses, and begin to experiment a little bit, those people who are hungry, they're off and running at that point. They don't need me or a book anymore.
Excuse me. So, talk to us about how you work with people. You offering courses, workshops, etc. What?
Yeah, and I've chosen to I've chosen to dig back into enterprise, guy, and I feel like I'm able to come at it with a new perspective, so it's not running me as much as it used to. But I'm developing a platform called Heal Plus Create, and that's a platform, that will have an app launch soon that actually invites people into these practices and into community around the practices. Um, we're doing a big writing retreat this fall in Santa Fe with Anne Lamott and Julia Cameron and different ones people would know about. So that feels like a larger scale experience, and people can can join us online as well. They don't have to be in person, so that's cool. So I do those kinds of things, and I do personal guidance work with people as well, one-on-one work where we sit and it tends to be intuitive self-discovery work a lot of the time.
Interesting. The writing retreats or workshops with Anne Lamott and Julie Cameron, are those for whom? Anyone? And
Sure.
what are they specifically?
I mean, these ones are specifically for people who we love to say it's for writers and those who want to be. So the New York Times 20 years ago did a big survey and discovered that over 80% of Americans who responded to the survey have a desire. They feel like they have a book in them. But the number of people who actually write a book and finish it is minuscule, of course. And so I just know that the pain of unexpressed talent is really excruciating for a lot of people. And so I'm not wanting to pitch people on becoming best-selling authors necessarily. I'm wanting to invite them into the experience of developing and expressing a talent that may be causing them pain
Yeah.
by not doing so.
Yeah. Well, I think you're on the right track. I mean, the book again is The Creative Cure. I was speaking with Jacob Nordby. Jacob, what's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
Well, they can probably just go to my website, jacobnordby.com. A lot of people drop the D out of there, jacobnordby.com. And on there, I have a free journaling exercise they can download, and it's a multimedia program. So I love to give that away. I love it so much. When I wrote it, Guy, it was an 11-page ebook. I've expanded it to have a visualization, guided visualization, and
Oh,
audio
wow.
as well. Yeah, I just love giving it away. When I first did it, I didn't think it was worth much because it was so simple. Just 3 questions to answer in a journal every day. And I started passing it around to some therapist friends of mine, and they started calling me saying, I'm using this with all of my clients because they're actually journaling. They've never journaled before, even though I've asked them to. Now they're doing it by answering 3 questions. So that's something I love to give away.
Awesome. Awesome. So can I link that up
Of
in the show
course.
notes? Awesome. We'll do that. Jacob, awesome, man. So inspiring. Like I said, I started reading this and I'm like, oh my God, this is crazy. This is,
Mm,
um, I have this big wood table with all my art stuff on it.
mm.
And I'm not getting there as much as I need to. And this book is helping me get there. So
Well, and Rick, I'm sure have you read this one by Rick Rubin?
I have it.
This new
I've
one?
started it. Yeah.
Yeah, I just love that the drumbeat is getting louder, and somebody of Rick Rubin's stature is now saying it. And I started reading the first chapter, and like, oh my God, this guy's saying the same thing in his own beautiful way. And so I just love that it's becoming more prominent in our culture because we need that.
Yeah. Well, I think your voice is a clarion call, and I'm so glad you joined me here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.